Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for watching this video. Express for whom ridership recovery and the importance of the Worcester Framingham line. My name is Josh Boucher. I'm a senior research associate here at the Worcester Regional Research Bureau. We are a nonprofit that has existed for about 40 years here in the city of Worcester, Massachusetts. And we conduct independent, nonpartisan research and analysis of public policy issues to promote informed public debate and decision making. But you're here today to talk about our commuter rail report, Express for Whom. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the just a couple of thank yous and introduction, and then we can discuss the ridership on the Worcester Framingham line, as well as some of the other data that we found while conducting this report. So thank you for being here. We previously did this presentation live, so thank you for watching this video here today. Special thank you to the Barr Foundation, funding from which has enabled us to do this research. We relied heavily on MBTA, National Transit Database, and census sources. And thanks especially to MBTA's open data portal, the data from which allowed so much of this report to happen. As a small nonprofit, we depend a lot on public data sources. But yeah, overall, ridership is strong on the Worcester Framingham line, and it's buoyed especially by weekend ridership, or the weekend ridership has a large proportion of total riders on the Worcester Framingham line. And moreover, onboardings at Worcester were extraordinarily strong in fall 2024. So we have some station boarding data that shows that onboardings were strong in fall 2024. So we'll start off by looking at the regional rail system overall. And what we see is that, yes, there was a precipitous drop in 2020, but overall the system is basically back to where it was in 2019 in terms of ridership. So in 2024, about 29 million riders on the MBTA's regional rail. This is somewhat below the trend from the 20 months before the pandemic, but we are getting back to and above, soon will be above those numbers. So if you look at the 20 months before the pandemic, that is the orange trend line here, and you can see that if that trend continued, we would be a bit higher than we are today, but we are getting back to that trend. I'm getting back to that trend line. Weekend ridership in this system is way up and way above the pre-pandemic trend. So this is that here. You can see that weekend ridership across the entire system on a month-to-month basis is really above the trend line that existed before the pandemic, and that is really quite interesting. And you can see that it does spike also around October every year. People taking the train to Salem is probably contributing a lot to that, as we'll see later. Now, why is weekend ridership up? A large part of this is probably the $10 unlimited pass that you can use on weekends, but also a regular clock-based schedule and more frequent service is likely playing a role, as well as increased reliability on the train lines. With this increased ridership, we see that weekend ridership now consistently makes up a much larger proportion of total ridership. And you can see that here, anywhere from 10 to 15 and sometimes as much as 20% of monthly ridership made up by weekend ridership, which is really impressive, especially looking at the consistent 5% before the pandemic. So zooming in on the Worcester Framingham line, we can see that Worcester Framingham is the second most ridden line in the system after Providence. Now, there's a pretty big gap there, but this is the estimated yearly boardings from 21-24, and the Worcester line is the blue line, and we can see that it is quite far behind Providence, but it is solidly in second place for the last 2-3 years. Throughout 2024, the line averaged about 14,000 riders on weekdays, pretty impressive, and nearly all ridership recovery is due to weekday riders. There's a lot of people taking the train as commuters, and there are also nearly 3 times as many trains on weekdays as there are on weekends. But weekend ridership is a large portion of the total. Weekend boardings are not as strong as the other 2 lines on the Worcester Framingham line. And again, you can see the orange spikes in October. That is Salem. But consistently, it makes up a larger proportion of total ridership on the weekend on the Worcester Framingham line in most months above the overall system, and in most months above Providence, the Providence line as well. In addition, average Saturday ridership in 2024 was often a large percentage of average weekday ridership on the Worcester Framingham line. Some months, average Saturday ridership was more than 50% of weekday ridership, which is really impressive when you consider that there are only 20 trains on weekends going in and outbound from South Station, rather than 55 on the Worcester Framingham line. Now, of course, there are going to be months where there are 5 Mondays or 5 Saturdays or something like that that's going to affect that total. In addition, it's quite interesting to see the percentage of different weekdays and how the Saturday ridership can change from day to day. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is station boarding data. And station boarding data became available from the MBTA and MassInc polling earlier this year for fall 2024. And this data has been extremely useful for our work, but it does have some drawbacks. So this data was collected only on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from September to November. And most of these trains only counted once unless there was a problem with the count. Individual trains counted on different days. So, the onboardings, for example, and the alightings might differ in the total number of people getting on and off, and part of that is because of the different days the trains were counted. And so the heat map on the next slide is really only an estimate of what a day might look like. So we should be careful not to take this data as final, but putting together what I want to call a composite day is actually really interesting and helpful in terms of thinking about who's getting on the train, when, where, and why. So here is a heat map, what I'm calling a heat map of inbound onboardings in fall 2024. Orange indicates that more riders got on that individual train, and blues indicate fewer riders, so a blue to orange scale. And each train is only is counted against itself. So the 528 train, for example, has the most riders getting on at Worcester at 27, and the fewest riders getting on at Back Bay with 4. And South Station wasn't counted in this heat map just because it's the last stop. Really interesting to point out that with few exceptions, trains that originated in Worcester had the most onboardings compared to other individual stops. Now, what is remarkable is that Worcester's Union Station had a large number of onboardings in the fall 2024 station boarding data. In fact, counting all trains, all day, all onboardings, 15.55% of inbound onboardings occurred in Worcester, more than any other stop on this particular line. And nearly 50% of onboardings occurred between Worcester and Framingham. So we are looking at Worcester, Grafton, Westboro, Southboro, Ashland, and Framingham, and almost 50% of onboardings occurred at these 6 stops right at the very beginning of the line. Really impressive onboardings here for the stations furthest away from Boston. If we look at trains that leave between 4 and 9 a.m., it's about 10 trains. So this is peak and just outside of peak commuting hours. There were 10 trains that departed between 4 and 9 a.m. on the Worcester line in fall 2024, and 7 originated in Worcester, and 4 are zonal express. So 3 of them went from West Natick to Boston Landing, and then one of them goes from St. Framingham to Lansdowne. But even still, Worcester saw more onboardings than any other stop during this period, 12.87% of total onboardings of all these 10 trains. So quite a lot of onboardings of people getting on Worcester in the morning on their commute. Only Framingham and Boston Landing come close. So a lot of people getting on at Worcester. And so here are the 7 trains originating in Worcester and the percentage of people getting on at these stops. So I should point out that train 504, 506, 508 skip Natick Center and all the way through Newtonville, and then stop at Boston Landing, and then train 552 skips West Natick through Boston Landing. Final portion of our report looks at Census Bureau data to try to map ridership and potential riders by community. So it's important to recognize that census data lags a bit. So the latest data is from 5-year estimates that cover 2019 to 2023. But the first map will show riders per 1,000 workers age 16 and over across all communities with Worcester Line stops or adjacent communities. So the MBTA Communities Act communities. And these are people who reported to the American Community Survey that they primarily take the commuter rail to get to and from their jobs. So here's that map. The darker the blue, the more riders per 1,000 workers. The orange just indicates that there was a high margin of error in that community. And then I have labeled the maps, or there's the communities that have Worcester Line stops. The numbers first indicate the number of people who reported taking the commuter rail primarily to the census. And these numbers, this is the within the margin of error number. And then the second number indicates the number of workers per 1,000. So for example, Worcester has 5.79 out of 1,000 workers getting on at Worcester, or taking the train at Worcester. But to put that in perspective, there's more than 75,000 people who are workers in the city or who work. So there are a lot of people going all over the place, staying in Worcester, going to Worcester's neighbors, and to other places that might not have train access. Fun fact, Sherborne had the most riders per 1,000 at nearly 90. And then also I want to say, if you filter to only workers whose commutes are 45 minutes or more, the number of riders in Worcester increases to 38.46 out of 1,000. So those are the riders who are going the furthest away, who are likely going somewhere on the line. The second set of maps is focused on transit-oriented development in considering that the potential for new riders on the rail depends on residential and job growth near train stations. And so between 2018 and 2022, the number of working residents within a half mile of Union Station in Worcester, Mass. Grew by an estimated 37%. So the data does lag a bit, as there have been a lot more housing units that have come online since 2022. This is data from the Census Bureau's Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics program. But the number of residents has grown. The number of working residents has grown. Meanwhile, the number of jobs has shrunk by 17%. But again, the data is a little older, 2022. Some of this might be remote work. Some of this might be offices not being used or whatever in 2022, thanks to the pandemic and the kind of tail end of that. But something to look at in following data releases. So here's the map of growth of residents, resident workers for Worcester to Framingham within a half mile and a mile of each of those stations. And you see growth across all of them, especially within a half mile. And then this is the map of jobs within a half mile and a mile of all of these stations. And you can take a look at those numbers there. So finally, just want to say there are a significant number of riders getting on at Worcester with the potential for more. There are a lot of residents coming online at Worcester, and there are a large number of potential riders in the area. As a whole, the segment of rail between Worcester and Framingham sees a large number of riders daily, nearly 50% of onboardings. Really impressive. And so again, that pool of potential riders is pretty big when you take all these communities into consideration. Ensuring that these 6 stops have frequent, speedy, and adequate service is key to the success of the rail line. It really is. If you're getting so many riders who are utilizing the Worcester-Framingham line and going to Boston or Newton or somewhere else on the line, these 6 stops really play a big important role in that, in those questions, those considerations. And so it is really important that these 6 stops have that frequent, speedy, and adequate service to continue the rail line success. And just as a final point, it's really important for these 6 communities to work together to advocate for fast-tracked infrastructure improvements. And it's absolutely crucial that they do so for the nearly 350,000 people living in these communities and the many tens of thousands more living nearby, as well as just trying to limit the disruptions caused by Alston I-90 construction when that project takes off. It's really important that the commuter rail line, the regional rail line from Worcester to South Station has as limited disruptions as possible, simply because you want to get people off of the highway and into the rail, and then you want to keep them there when the construction ends. So it's really important that these communities maintain that vital access to Boston and beyond. So I just want to say again, thank you for listening today. And you can find us online at WRRB.org. And you can email us anytime with questions about our work. So thank you.